of events that New Brunswick Today is putting together to speak with experts and community leaders about the most pressing issues of the day. This is a series that we're looking forward to doing and broadcasting live to you. We also do have some folks who've joined us in our Zoom room, and you can do that at the link provided in our Facebook event. If you want to ask a question, we are going to have 3 wonderful panelists joining us, and we'll be discussing the issue of police accountability and transparency and the role that journalism can play in that. And we've got some great guests. But first, I want to thank everybody who made this possible, our team of writers and other support staff who helped make this series a possibility. And also want to give a special thank you to the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State, who has helped New Brunswick Today and so many other local community news outlets get their start and survive in this difficult environment. I know we do have somebody from the center here. Joe, if you want to say a few words, just shoot me a message. I'm happy to upgrade you to panelist status if you want. I do want to say that, you know, we really wanted to have a in-person gathering like we had done in the past many times, and we miss doing that so much, but it's just not feasible at this moment. So we did want to use our creative ways here to get a gathering together online where our writers and the community that reads New Brunswick Today and watches these videos can interact, and also get to interact with some of the great community leaders and newsmakers that are at the forefront of these important issues. So tonight we're going to have a great discussion about this stuff. Before we get to our panelists, I did want to go over some of the work that New Brunswick Today has done on this topic recently, and let you all know about some of the breaking news that we broke this morning. So this summer, you may have seen our coverage of Lieutenant Raymond Trigg. He was the commander of the domestic violence unit, but he was apparently using a city-issued cellular phone to stalk a woman who worked for the city of New Brunswick, and he ultimately was the topic of an internal affairs investigation. So when we look at police matters, a lot of times there's matters where the police do nothing wrong, and then there's matters where there's a gray area sometimes, and we may never know who did what right or wrong. But what we do want folks to know is when these situations come up where folks have been found to have done wrong, what happens then? And that's where internal affairs is laid bare for us. And that's what we did in our June 22nd article. We did reach out to the lieutenant, give him a chance to basically explain himself. We had seen text messages and even lewd images that he had sent this woman from the phone. And we ultimately found out that there was an internal affairs investigation and that Lieutenant Trigg had been disciplined, but the discipline was a mystery. And we find that that's almost always the case with internal affairs. Not only do we not usually know what the punishment is for the wrongdoing, but a lot of times we don't even know who it was that did the wrongdoing. They try to keep that a secret if they can. In this case, we knew who did the wrong. We knew that he was disciplined, but we did not know ultimately what came of it. Obviously the discipline did not cost him his phone because we were able to reach him on that phone. And ultimately the complaint was not sustained, we learned, which is a term that refers to complaints that there was not evidence to hold up the arguments that or the accusations against the officer. Doesn't mean that they didn't do anything wrong, but it means that they weren't able to sustain the complaint. And we found this to be a little surprising, that there would be a violation and discipline, but the complaint would be categorized as not sustained. And we were able to confirm that that actually was what the outcome of the internal affairs investigation was. And another interesting thing that that our investigation touched upon was the process that the Internal Affairs used to conduct the investigation, where they had the lieutenant's friends were the ones investigating him, and ultimately, Facebook shows that they are Facebook friends, and obviously, our sources told us that this was not the most independent or thorough investigation, and that once it came to light, well, that was the end of Lieutenant Trigg's career as a police officer. He was removed from being the domestic violence commander, and that did not satisfy the people who were unhappy about what he had done, and so he retired at the end of July and is no longer a police officer. So that was just one story that New Brunswick Today has shined a light on, and given the community access to information that otherwise would not have been available. And that was a really, outlets have been doing a great job too. We saw a case exposed by the New Jersey Law Journal, and ultimately NJ Advanced Media followed up on the case of Joshua Alexander, a detective here in New Brunswick, who was found to have committed test-lying, is the term for it. So, he was on the witness stand testifying about a execution of a search warrant in a marijuana case, and apparently what he had to say about it was contradicted by a video that the defense attorney introduced. And so that touches on all kinds of issues about truthfulness. And, if this is the one time this one guy got caught, how often are police officers being truthful when they're on the witness stand? A real serious consideration for our criminal justice system. And also it touches upon the fact that New Brunswick police do not have body-worn cameras. We've been covering that issue since those things started to come on the scene, and New Brunswick police say they support it and they want to do it, but they've never appropriated a single dollar in the city budget to purchase even one body-worn camera. So none of the officers wear body-worn cameras. It's a situation where that may have prevented this lying from happening. And also, the big issue was that the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office was actually covering this up and trying to suppress the information. The defense attorney wanted to share the video and the proof that this test of lying had gone on, and the prosecutor's office actively tried to seal those records and keep those records from being made public, which is even more concerning, because it seems like rather than making sure that future testimony has integrity, they wanted the public to have little information about the integrity of the witnesses that they might be calling. And then finally, the other point on that one was that it was also not sustained, according to the NJ.com report. So a similar situation where officer was found to have done something wrong, was disciplined, yet not sustained. So for folks who see those statistics that are put together at the, in New Brunswick, they do them monthly. Some places they do quarterly. Those IA statistics would show these complaints as just not sustained. That's what they would be categorized as, and it's really a form of juking the stats, or coming to misleading categories for these cases. And then finally, do want to get to the big news of today. We broke a story this morning that Middlesex County has not one, but two corrections officers. These are considered law enforcement officers in New Jersey, the people at the jail. Those corrections officers were charged with crimes. We don't know their identities, and we don't know if they, or we don't know what crimes they're accused of. We just know that they were criminally charged in 2019. This information came to us via one of those summary forms. It was actually incorrect at first, and we'll get to that in a second. But the big thing here is that the county jail is not following the very, very low bar that they have to meet for transparency when there are issues of internal affairs complaints that lead to what's called major discipline. And so that includes criminal cases, and whenever somebody gets in enough trouble that they are either fined or demoted or fired or suspended for 10 days or more, that's considered major discipline. And the agency is supposed to release statistics or release actually a synopsis of what happened. So usually a sentence or a sentence fragment about it. You can see examples on the New Brunswick Police Department website of their situations where they had to release a synopsis for major discipline. But in this case, we learned from repeated questioning of the governing body here, the county freeholders, that these officers are indeed, suspended, or one of them is still suspended. One of them served a 6-month suspension and is back to work. Either way qualifies as major discipline, and there should be a synopsis released. But we exposed that the county has not released it, and we've been asking them to release the information about this for 6 weeks. So today we got the Attorney General involved. We released our story, and we exposed what we know. We still don't know the identities. We're hopeful we're going to find them out sooner or later, but we did put the information out there that these two corrections officers got in trouble with the law, which is even more serious than a lot of internal affairs matters. And this also touches upon a really, really hot topic right now, one that was just before the appellate division courts this week. Basically, the Attorney General of New Jersey has proposed slightly improving the transparency required for internal affairs matters. And basically, the changes he's proposed are really modest, basically just saying that if you do get major discipline, you would be named instead of having the mystery situation now that we have with these corrections officers, for instance. The AG wants, going forward, all cases of major discipline for the officer to be named in that synopsis that should be released. And so that's a relatively small change compared to what other states have in place and compared to what transparency advocates are pushing for here. But to some people, it's a really big deal, and they really don't want this information to come out. And those people are largely, united with the police unions to oppose this, and they did succeed in averting the implementation of this directive. And we'll hear about that from some of our guests today, I'm sure. But basically, the Attorney General's directives are on hold pending this court case that was just before the appellate division this week. And as of now, cases like these, the issue of whether or not these folks will be named in the Middlesex County Jail is an open question that's in limbo because of this issue. And I think it is worth noting the Attorney General only came out with these modest proposals after the nationwide outrage following the police killing of George Floyd. And this was something that was done in that moment and was supposed to be implemented July 15th, but now has not. And now it's unclear if it will be. So obviously, cause for concern. The final point on this final article I wanted to share with you, and you can see that at the top of our website. If you just go to newbrunswicktoday.com, if you didn't see it already, check it out, and you can even see the documents and the audio that we have in there. But it revealed the county's true commitment to transparency or lack thereof, because at first, due to an error in the summary form that the jail had put out, many of us, including the county government attorney, were under the impression that these two officers had actually been convicted of crimes and were not just on trial. And even in that moment where we were all mistaken and we thought that was the case, the county government was saying they refused to name the individuals. So it was a glimpse at what position they would be taking if indeed their law enforcement officers are found guilty and convicted of crimes. They still don't think that the public should be able to know their names, even in those situations. So that was a really troubling and bizarre situation that I was glad I was able to get that coverage out today, and glad that we can be joined by so many great people today. I do want to just say before we get to the panel that if anybody wants to support this kind of work and make New Brunswick Today able to produce more articles and more content in English and Spanish, and to continue to hold our local government accountable, the best way to do that is by becoming a monthly supporter. There is a link that or a URL on the screen for those of you watching on the web. It's nb.today/donate. You can go to any page on our website and you will see the opportunity to donate. And I do want to make a special request for those of you who can, are fortunate enough in this time to be able to support news outlets that you like and that you read and that you value. Monthly giving is the best way to support. And so we do make it really easy. There's just a checkbox there that you can check, and you can give your donation of 5, 10, 20, or whatever you can spare on a monthly basis. That enables us to plan for the future and continue to build this operation, and also to do more great events like this. So we're really pleased to be here and to have so many folks with us today. So without further ado, we have 3 wonderful panelists who I'd like them to introduce themselves and say a few words. I'll just say CJ Griffin is one of those attorneys who was fighting the good fight this week in the appellate division, and I did listen to all the arguments, and just really phenomenal work, and proud to sometimes work with her on Open Public Records Act cases, and just to see not only the advocacy in the courtroom, but also the advocacy of getting people to support changing these laws to get us the transparency we need. So CJ, tell people about what you do and your thoughts on all these things.
Sorry about that. Good evening. My name is CJ Griffin, and I'm a partner at the law firm Pashman, Stein, Walder & Hayden. And I'm the director of the firm's Public Interest Center, and I run the firm's Open Public Records Act practice. And I have a pretty significant focus on police transparency in particular. So I do a lot of Oprah cases involving police records, and have been involved in a lot of the recent push to open these internal affairs files. And like Charlie said, I participated in the arguments this week before the appellate division. I publish a blog for those that are interested in public records issues. It's available at njoprah.com. And I try to summarize a little bit of what's going on in the world of public records access and police transparency. And yesterday I published a blog that has all of the briefing from the appellate division arguments, so you can see what the police union is arguing and what advocates are arguing in favor of disclosure here. I'll let others introduce myself, and then we can talk about the issues.
Thanks so much for being with us. Next, I want to introduce another friend who's been fighting the good fight for a long time, Rich Rivera, former police officer who has devoted himself to civil rights and improving police practices. We're really honored to have you. Rich, say hello, tell people about yourself and your thoughts.
Thanks for having me, Charlie. And I think it's a very important discussion that we're having, particularly this year, involving police accountability, use of force incidents, etc. I was a police officer, and I was suspended before being fired, so I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of internal affairs complaints. And had I known back then what I know now, I would have wanted those records to be open to the public so they could see exactly what went down, to see that I got railroaded, that the system was unfair to me. And but from that experience, I really gained an insight into policing, and this has been my life's work ever since, helping advocates. I'm a member of POP for almost 20 years now. I work with CJ on Oprah cases and police transparency issues, and I've been on the ground there in New Brunswick with you, dating back as far as Barry DeLoach's unfortunate death. So I look forward to this discussion. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for being with us, and thank you for your work. And our third and final panelist, speaking of POP, the People's Organization for Progress, we are honored to have the founder of that organization, Mr. Larry Hamm. Larry has been extremely active and engaged pretty much his whole life, but one move that he hadn't made, at least to my knowledge, was putting his name on the ballot for federal office. And he did that for the first time this year, and quite a year to be running for office. And ran a really good campaign for U.S. Senate here in New Jersey. So it's an honor to have Mr. Larry Hamm join us. Larry, tell the folks about yourself and your thoughts.
Well, Charlie, I'm honored to be on this program with you, and I want to tell you to keep up the good work with New Brunswick Today, pulling the covers off of corruption in the area. And I'm honored to be on with CJ, and I'm honored to be on with my friend of more than 2 decades, Richard Rivera. I am the chair, as you said, I'm the chairman of the People's Organization for Progress, an all-volunteer grassroots organization fighting for racial, social, economic justice and peace. We're an all-volunteer, multi-issue organization, but the issue we're probably known most for is police brutality. We've been in the anti-police brutality movement since our organization was founded in 1982. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm anxious to get into discussion.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thanks to everybody who's watching. Again, if you do want to get the opportunity to maybe ask a question, you can join us in the Zoom room. If you just want to watch, you can stay where you're at on Facebook or YouTube. And let's get started. I think a key way that journalists get information to hold not just police, but all manner of folks accountable is the Open Public Records Act, which is the state law that gives a right to access government records to citizens. And I know that there's a nexus between Oprah and internal affairs, and it's a hot topic, as we talked about with the Attorney General's directives. But there's also at least one bill pending in Trenton that could increase the public's access to those records. And so, CJ, if you would be so kind as to tell us about internal affairs records and maybe where New Jersey ranks compared to other states and what we can do about it.
Sure. So internal affairs, for people that don't know, I'll just briefly describe. If you want to file a complaint against an officer because you believe they've done something wrong, they've used, demeaning language towards you, they've used excessive force against you, they've lied, they've cheated, anything that you think that they've done wrong to you, and that can be internal complaints as well. Those complaints are investigated by the agency's internal affairs unit, which is their fellow officers. As you pointed out, sometimes they're their friends. They conduct these investigations, and then they decide whether or not the complaint was sustained. And then if it was sustained, then a superior will decide whether or not punishment should be imposed. And the annual summary reports that they release to the public will tell you the number of complaints they received and what the disposition was. And those reports show that the overwhelming majority of complaints filed by the public, sometimes 95% of them, are never sustained. So when you file a complaint, there's a very high probability that the police are going to investigate themselves secretly and then clear themselves. So one thing that we've been focusing on is trying to find a way to open those records up to the public. And right now, about 50%, a little more than 50% of the states have some access to internal affairs files. And about 14 to 15 states have almost complete access to internal affairs files. So Florida, Georgia, Alabama, those are some places where you can go and just walk in and view these internal affairs records and learn so much more about how these investigations are conducted and whether discipline is imposed. But here in New Jersey, it's been a top secret since the beginning of time. And we don't know anything about how these investigations are carried out. As you mentioned, they have to release these sort of annual summary charts that just say how many complaints there are and how they were disposed. And then they're supposed to release an annual report that gives a brief synopsis of discipline. It doesn't say the name, but it should say something along the lines of, and I'll give you an example of one that said, Trooper A was terminated because they engaged in racially offensive behavior and had questionable associations. That was one that was in a state trooper report. They don't tell you the name, but at least you know what happened, and then they'll tell you what the outcome was, which was that they were disciplined or that they received a suspension. Unfortunately, a lot of agencies don't ever disclose those. So even though now the Attorney General has issued a directive saying going forward, every agency will need to put the name on there, it doesn't mean that they're actually going to do it. And so that's, part of the problem and part of why we need legislation. And so what the legislation that we're supporting, it's called S2656. It's introduced by Senator Loretta Weinberg, and I'll talk about that again later, I'm sure. It will make all police disciplinary records subject to OPRA. So all of the complaints, the investigation files, the body cams, everything will be subject to OPRA. There will be protections for complainants and witnesses if they want the protection. Not all complainants want it. Sometimes they want the public to know what happened, but that protection will be built in. There won't be disclosure of officers' contact information or their family's contact information to make sure that they're protected. There won't be disclosure of medical information, medical history, but in general, we'll be able to see the actual investigation files to see who's investigating it. Was the investigation thorough? Why aren't these complaints being sustained? And so we think that's really critical. Police really are the only profession in New Jersey where we know absolutely nothing about their discipline. If I receive a complaint against me, it's going to be adjudicated, and you'll know the outcome and what the punishment was. If your plumber has a complaint against them, you'll know the outcome. Police officers, you only know if someone leaks it to the press or the complainant talks to the press. So that's just not good for, it's just not a good thing. Secrecy, tends to lead to corruption and misconduct.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's another point, is that police are essentially not licensed at this point. Something that's in the works to have a licensing system. But yeah, as far as discipline and all these key things are not known here in New Jersey unless somebody happens to expose it. So great points. Thank you for that. I know, Rich, you've had experience with internal affairs, and it's not maybe doesn't have the best reputation of being an independent, thorough, fact-finding group. Maybe you can tell us about sort of how internal affairs can be weaponized sometimes, or how it doesn't necessarily suit the public interest.
Sure, Charlie. I mean, you got to look at it realistically. Every police department in the state of New Jersey is required to have this internal affairs function. So at a minimum, one person is handling this for the entire police department. And that could be a part-time position, particularly in the smaller police department. So not only is the officer's career, their fate, in the hands of that one individual, but there's no appeal process for the complainant. They have nowhere to turn to. It's a secret document. It can't be open. It's strictly confidential. The police chief may or may not take a look at these files. And I have a very unique perspective of it, not only from being on the receiving end of quite a few of these, but now as an expert consultant testifying on these matters in federal and state courts around the country, I get to see the entire case file. So I assess the quality and the thoroughness and the completeness of these to the tune of over 1,000 of them in New Jersey. And I can tell you, we definitely need external oversight. There's got to be some other means of looking at these records and compelling police departments to do a better job at policing themselves. Right now, that's not taking place. It's a fallacy. It's a myth. The unions are crying that it's going to besmirch officers, that their names are going to be dragged through the mud. That's not the case. What you really need to look at is how much money the unions are getting from attorneys that are participating in their legal defense of these officers, who some of them are unfairly targeted, who have no business being on the receiving end of an internal affairs complaint, but the PBA reps and other union officials are going out playing golf with a round of attorneys. So these are the different intricacies. This is the cottage industry that police discipline has evolved to over the years, and it's shameful. And once you start shedding more light on it, I think we're going to have a better glimpse of what actually takes place behind the scenes.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, you touch on the need for external oversight. So kind of the issue of if the police are the only ones policing themselves, it's kind of, obviously doomed to fail. I wanted to talk with Larry about the alternatives to internal affairs and the sort of civilian review and the ongoing, long-standing fight for meaningful civilian review of police actions in Newark and other communities. Larry, could you tell a little bit about civilian review boards? Well, maybe we'll catch up with Larry in a moment if maybe he's distracted.
No, can you hear me now? I was
Hey.
on mute.
Okay.
I was on mute. Sorry. Let me say at the outset that I think that all police forces should have some form of civilian oversight. Those in cities and large cities and towns, there should certainly be civilian complaint review boards. I still say the old-fashioned term police review boards, but in Newark, they've named it the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I find that a little comical because the word police is nowhere in there, you know. So, but police review board, civilian review board is the same thing. I think it is absolutely essential. Every major town and city in the state should have a police review board, and those that are so small that they can't afford a full-fledged, fully staffed review board should have some type of oversight of civilian, a commission appointed by city government, maybe the city council, the mayor, whatever. But many people don't know, we have probably the second largest police force in the world. There are more than somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million police officers, police staff in the United States. The only country that has more than us is the People's Republic of China. And they have more because they have 4 times the population. We have about 330 million people in the United States. China has 1.2 billion people. And I really think it is essential, not just as a form of trying to eliminate the problem of police brutality. I actually think it's essential to democracy. I think that the police have become a power to themselves. They are not just a paramilitary force, they're a political force. And they're using their political power to influence laws and legislation, not only to benefit themselves, but also to support those politicians that support them. And my other concern is that the FBI has already come out with several reports saying that police at all levels in the United States, including the FBI itself, has been infiltrated by white supremacists. And many of them are members of organizations that advocate violence, violence against minority groups and other peoples. Some of them even advocate the violent overthrow of the United States government. And we see now the emergence of an extreme right-wing movement in this country. Some people would say authoritarian. I would say fascist. Some say tomato. I say tomato. I think the end result is still the same. We have a right-wing, extreme right-wing movement in this country, and the police are one leg of that movement. I think it's very interesting and worthy of discussion that President Trump, who we all know pushes a right-wing authoritarian, I say fascist agenda, he was endorsed in 2016 by the Ku Klux Klan. In 2020, he's been endorsed by all the major police organizations in the country. The 355,000 member Fraternal Order Police endorsed Donald Trump. I mean, what do we say about a president that is endorsed both by the Ku Klux Klan and by the FOP? The New Jersey PBA came out 2 weeks ago. The New Jersey Association of Police Organizations came out a couple of weeks ago in favor of Trump. It's a very dangerous tendency. And they have used their power to reinforce a bulwark of regulations, laws, contract provisions, and a police culture that gives them a degree of protection from prosecution that the average citizen does not have. And I think that this is a very dangerous tendency, especially considering the leadership at the highest levels of law enforcement in this country. Barr, the Attorney General, who's the chief law enforcement officer, the other day came out and said Black people, minorities should be more appreciative of the police, because if they're not, maybe the police shouldn't provide them the services that they're paid to provide. I mean, what kind of talk is that? Barr yesterday said that protesters stepping all over the freedom of speech, said protesters should be arrested for sedition. We're in very dangerous times, and policing right now is part of the problem, and we need to get a handle on it. So I say that, you know I've overstepped my time here. I can come back with the history of the Police Review Board, but I think it's really important that we have civilian oversight of the police at all levels in this country.
Thank you so much for all that context there. And yeah, so yeah, Civilian Review Board in Newark is definitely made some strides and become its own thing, but got quite a setback this year with the loss of subpoena power and other things taken away by a really real big setback in that court ruling. And so maybe CJ, if you could tell us a little bit about police unions and the types of things that they're advocating for in these court cases, and the arguments they make for why they shouldn't be held accountable. The individual officers shouldn't be held accountable. Why civilian review shouldn't happen. Those kinds of things. And what do they say about how do they defend keeping it a secret which officers have domestic violence or drinking and driving in their past?
Yeah, so one thing to know about the police unions is that they're not like other unions. They generally have never historically been advocating for workers' rights. They've often been, historically have upheld the rights of businesses to oppress laborers. They originally started out, the police in general originally started out as slave patrols. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that I'm very pro labor union, but police unions are not labor unions. So the police unions have opposed all measures of transparency. They're very against it. And one thing that they've argued with regard to the recent, disclosure directives by the Attorney General and really any just transparency measure is that they're entitled to privacy. They sort of conceded like, okay, maybe the public should be able to get some information about who's a blatant racist and who uses excessive force, or when those complaints are sustained. Mind you, most of those complaints are never sustained, and that's not necessarily because it didn't happen. So they've sort of taken this narrow position that the public's only interest is in finding out when someone's a blatant racist and when there's a sustained finding of excessive force, but that we don't have any public interest, and it's their own personal business whether they got DWIs, whether they haven't paid, whether they're disciplined for not paying their child support and being arrested, whether they sleep. They literally said sleeping on the job is something there's no public interest in us knowing. That they're getting in bar fights because they were drunk, being disciplined for using police vehicles while coming to work under intoxication. There's just like a long laundry list of things they've argued that really doesn't serve the public interest in us knowing. And the rebuttal, of course, is that these are our employees. When you or I get a DWI, the public knows about it. When you or I engage in any sort of crime, or even if we're not convicted, the public knows about it. and they're public employees being paid with public resources and using public resources. And of course, if you are prone to domestic violence, that probably means that you might not also treat members of the public very well. You might be prone to violence against members of the public. So there's all sorts of reasons, why we need that information. But they've really stood in the way of all of it. They believe that, as Larry said, that they've sort of become this entity unto themselves, and that we don't have any role in their accountability or knowing anything that they do at all, that they're separate from us. And one thing in this, the appellate division case, I actually represented law enforcement organizations for, I would say not the first time, because Rich and I have filed over 50 Oprah lawsuits together. So I'm used to working with former law enforcement officers, and I have other clients that are former law enforcement officers. This was my first time representing these two organizations. And so I was writing as a friend of the court brief for them, which means trying to portray what their interest in transparency is and what they believe about policing is. And that really gave me an opportunity to sort of educate myself about other views on policing beyond the messaging that you hear from the unions, and all the views in favor of transparency by police officers. And so one of the things in our brief, we started out by quoting, Sir Robert Peel, who sort of held out as this creator of modern policing from the early 1800s in London. And one of the theories that he has, which continues to be relevant today when people talk about better policing methods, which is, community policing, which is the people are the police and the police are the people, that they're supposed to be one and the same in the same community. The police are just playing a safety role, there's supposed to be transparency, and that community trust is the utmost important part of that relationship. And that when the public trusts the police, then they're more likely to report crimes to them and to cooperate with investigations, and even advocate for the police. And when that trust breaks down, then you see people being scared to report things to the police. You see people not wanting to cooperate when they saw something happen. And you even see people like now wanting to defund the police or abolish the police altogether. So it's that core component of trust that police officers that support transparency, they believe that is the core component. And that's what the Obama Justice Department found in its report that it released as well, that trust is imperative. And so there are a lot of police officers that really do support being transparent and realize that it's good for them. And another way in which, another thing about the unions, and another thing that I argued, the police unions and the police force too, but the police unions are overwhelmingly white men. There's very little gender diversity or racial diversity among them. And that's true, in our police force, it's just disproportionately white and male. And transparency can benefit minority and women officers. And even though the Attorney General directives do not go nearly far enough, still just disclosing that little bit of information about major discipline will allow officers of color and women to say, hey, here's two officers that did the same offense, and one of them received 15 days suspension and one of them received 5. What's the disparity? And we can look for patterns there as well. So, I think that's a pretty good summary about the police unions and the arguments they're making.
Thanks so much for that. Rich, I know you work with New Brunswick-based organization, Latino Leadership Alliance in New Jersey, and I know that you took a strong stand after the incidents in Asbury Park, and that was one of the things after the killing of George Floyd. There were a lot of positive, uplifting things that came out of that. We saw huge peaceful protests in New Brunswick and other cities. But we also saw some places where curfews were implemented, crackdowns happened, and I like the fact that you didn't mince words and you called what happened in Asbury Park a police riot. Can you tell us about what you know about that situation and why you think that came to be, and
Yeah, I mean, just from my experience, Charlie, and I've been in dozens upon dozens of protests. I've been mentored by the best, Larry Hamm. I've led protests. I've participated in them as a cop. I've worked them. I've also been to protests on behalf of police officers, on behalf of union members, because they themselves couldn't come out because they were afraid of repercussions. And what happened in Asbury is not an unusual reaction. An overreaction by police officers with short fuses, short tempers, boys with their toys, looking to use the accoutrements that the police are provided, um, zero patience, zero tolerance. And let's keep in mind, that had already dispersed. That demonstration was over. It was peaceful. It was uneventful in terms of people confronting the police or getting themselves in trouble. And someone arbitrarily decided that they were going to put an end to it. And what's remarkable, beyond what you already know and what I'm commenting about in the Asbury incident, is at the same time, the Attorney General is talking out of both sides of his mouth, saying that there needs to be transparency, that we're going to hold police officers accountable, and we haven't heard boo out of the county prosecutor there or the Attorney General's office about holding those officers that caused that riot accountable.
Yeah, and of course, they've chosen to focus only on the narrow issue of the one journalist who was arrested, and then they dropped the charges the next morning when they found out he was a journalist. But what they haven't addressed is what that journalist captured on video, which was some really, violent behavior towards juveniles. And we haven't heard anything from the governor or the AG or anybody else on that. So I'm glad that you made that statement. Thank you for your insights on that. Larry, I would just like to hear from you on, your perspective. You grew up in Newark, you're obviously very involved there. Newark, the police and the community have had this tension for such a long time. Can you tell us just some thoughts on, after all these years, what your perspective is?
Right. But before I do that, I just want to say I saw something pop up just now that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has passed away. That will be a terrible blow.
Terrible loss. Horrible.
Terrible loss. And it's going to have a profound effect on our judicial system, especially what's going to happen in the next six weeks, 46 days until the election. But anyway, trying to stay on topic for Charlie. Historically, CJ mentioned a very critical piece, and that is that one of the roots of policing in America are the slave patrols. And so Black people historically have had a problem with the police when they were slave patrols and when they evolved into police forces as we know them. This is a problem that goes all the way back to the 19th century. It's not a new problem. It goes all the way back to emancipation. But in the early 1960s, actually, early to mid 1960s, Black people in Newark put forward the demand for a police review board because the situation was so bad. And then, we had the rebellion of 1967. The demand was raised again. And for 50 years, people have been protesting against police brutality in Newark. And then finally, in 2014, Ras Baraka, whose father, by the way, was almost killed by the Newark police during the rebellion of 1967, Ras Baraka issues an executive order to create a police review board. A year later, the city council makes it permanent by passing an ordinance for the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And then immediately after that, the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 12 goes into court, files an injunction in Superior Court to stop the police review board. And they actually ended up winning the case at the Superior Court level. The city of Newark, under Mayor Baraka, appealed. The city won at the appeals level. the appellate court saying that Newark had the right to establish a police review board and had the right to establish one with subpoena power and investigatory power. That's key, because if it doesn't have those things, it doesn't really have any teeth. But the police didn't stop. They filed up to the state Supreme Court. And then back in, I believe it was the beginning of, beginning of August, the state Supreme Court ruled that Newark could have a police review board, but that it couldn't have one with subpoena power and investigatory power. So now the fight is reforming itself, reorganizing itself. The city plans to go back into court, but the city would have to come in and say, you know, you'd have to ask them to say exactly what they're going to do, because I'm not privy to that at this point. I know that we went to Trenton. We had a demonstration in Trenton against the state Supreme Court ruling, and we plan to return to Trenton. And we're going to continue through all of our protests, and everybody knows that POP protests regularly against police brutality. We're going to continue to raise the demand for a police review board with subpoena power, because civilian oversight of the police is critical. You know, when the Justice Department came in and essentially, you know, took over the Newark Police Department through a consent decree and the appointment by a federal judge of independent monitor, who happened to be Peter Harvey, the former state attorney general. He's now the independent monitor over the Newark police force. They cited 4 areas that needed remediation. And one of the 4 areas was civilian oversight. They didn't specifically say civilian complaint review board, but the U.S. Attorney's report did say there should be civilian oversight of the police. So we're going to keep fighting on the ground and in the streets through our protests. We're going to keep fighting for that.
Great. Thank you for that, Larry. So we are approaching the end of the hour. I did want to give all 3 of our panelists a chance to make concluding remarks. And, you know, I would I guess, start with a general question. If you could tell, you know, our audience, regular people, how they can help. You know, what, for instance, CJ, what people can do to help get that bill S-2656 passed. You know, Larry, maybe you could tell people what people can do to help with the civilian review efforts. And just also feel free to promote your organizations and the work that you're doing, and let people know where they can find you and connect with you. So I guess we'll just go in the same order. CJ, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Charlie. It's been a great discussion. You know, here's a few things you can do. S-2656 is Senator Weinberg's bill, which means you can call your members of the Assembly and the Senate and ask them to support that bill and say that you believe that police disciplinary records should be public. There's also a petition on the Innocence Project's website that you can go and fill out for that. If you follow me on Twitter, my handle is right here, but it's at CJ Griffin ESQ. And I tweet the petition out frequently, but I also tweet every day about transparency topics. Another big thing I think you can do for racial justice in New Jersey is in November, marijuana legalization will be on the ballot. And right now we arrest about 35,000 people a year for cannabis possession, and it's disproportionately Black and brown people. So vote yes to legalize it. And, you know, I'm very sad finding this out about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I think we're going to have to put a lot of political pressure so that Trump does not replace her. Our democracy might really depend on it. And if you're someone that believes about progress and progressive policies, letting Ruth Bader Ginsburg be replaced with one of, you know, Ted Cruz or someone on Trump's list would, for the rest of our lives, mean that we never will see any progress. So, you know, those are some things I think you can do. And thank you for listening tonight.
Thanks so much for joining us. Rich, any concluding remarks you'd like to make?
Sure, and thanks for having me as well. I mean, my perspective in closing is going to be from the individuals that are confronted by the police, whether it's a car stop or something else, where they shouldn't get engaged in any type of confrontation, that they should cooperate with them. The fight is not there in the car. It's not there on the street. It's not there on the street corner. Record it, be polite, use your cell phone, don't stick it in their face. Make sure you document everything as best you could. The fight is after, it's later, it's down the road. You need to get out of that situation. You need to leave it safely. And then down the road, if you need to file an internal affairs complaint, don't do that alone. Get somebody to help you with. Make sure it's well documented. Make sure it's articulated. I've seen people get dissuaded. I myself have been confronted by police when trying to find out information about their internal affairs process. And I know what the process is. So if you're going in there alone and you're trying to attempt to get information, don't do it alone.
Thanks for that advice, Rich, and thanks for joining us. Larry, any concluding remarks? How can people support your work and help with the fight?
Well, I think that one of the, in this very disheartening period that we're in, one bright spot has been the amount of protests that I have seen throughout the state of New Jersey, specifically in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. There were protests in, I think I've heard, over 500 cities and towns throughout the country. I think I read 150 cities and towns in New Jersey had protests. And some of these towns, if you had told me there would be a protest against police brutality, I would never have believed it. But the wonderful thing is that people of all races have come together to protest against police brutality, to demand justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the other victims of police brutality. So my closing words are, I second everything that CJ has recommended. I second everything that my friend Rich has recommended, but I end with this: continue to protest. Protest, dissent. First of all, it's something that's guaranteed by the Constitution. And if you don't already know it, I have to say that our constitutional rights are in jeopardy. So people should continue to protest, to demand justice for the victims of police brutality, to demand police reforms, and protest, use the freedom of assembly and freedom of speech to protest all issues that you are concerned about. And I think the way it has happened in New Jersey over the past 4 or 5 months is the way that we should continue. I mean, it's great. I go to Washington when the word is given to protest, but I think more effectively is when you have 150 protests in different cities and towns. It's just wonderful. So continue to protest, continue to demand justice, stay in the streets. And I think in that way, you really help the movement.
Great. Thank you so much. Really, really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, CJ, Rich, and Larry, for being a part of this first in a series of discussions we'll be having here at New Brunswick Today. I thought this went great. Thank you to April, Carlos, and everybody else at the New Brunswick Today team. Special thank you to the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State and the great folks at NJ News Commons. If you do want to support events like this, articles like the ones we published today, and innovative community news solutions, please go to newbrunswicktoday.com. You can donate, and if you can, become a monthly sustaining donor. Please consider doing that. We all have choices to make about what we support with our wallets, and this is something where I can tell you personally, we're going to make the most of any donation you give us to really improve the access to information for the community here in New Brunswick, and to, of course, shine a light on the issues that need to be exposed and hold the powerful accountable. So if you want to support that, please do go to the URL on your screen, or just go to New Brunswick Today and support us with either a one-time donation or sign up to become a monthly supporter. Please do join us again. We'll be doing another one of these very soon, and the topic will be another hot topic: elections and voting, as we get near the November 3rd general election, one of the most important in the history of our United States. So thank you again to everyone who was a part of this. Please share the video, tell your friends about this, and give us your feedback. If you like this, or if you think there was something that we could do better, let us know. We're always, we always want to hear from the people who watch and read our work. And so continue to follow New Brunswick Today, share this stuff, and keep everybody in your circles informed. We're going through a really difficult time right now, and something that can help us get through it is having access to good quality information. So thank you again to everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and be well. Enjoy your weekends, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.